but just with a quick thanks to Professor Randall for leading this program and improving it so much and sort of setting it in a place that made my job particularly easy. So that's always nice. And we're really excited to hear what you have to share with us tonight. Thank you.
So first I have to play the beginning of this. Yeah, no, actually, I prepared a playlist for tonight. That's all I'm going to do is play music.
DJ Randall.
Which will be, I'm sure, be really special. Good timing. I apologize. Apparently, I didn't realize that I had this on when I was schmoozing with everybody beforehand. So I guess I'll turn it back on now. Fortunately, I didn't say what I was really thinking at all when I had it on before, so I don't really like working with this, but Liz tells me I have to, and I always do what Liz says. So, oh, I forgot I need this thing too. So, first, thank you. It's wonderful to see some alumni here who I haven't seen in a long time, who have come from a long way to be here. So thank you all for, thanks everybody for coming, but especially for the alumni who made a real special effort to be here. They maybe haven't been back in Questrom in a while. So when I was trying to think of what I wanted to do tonight, my first thought was, well, okay, it's a honors program event. I can prepare some academic topic and give some people something to read, and we can talk about that. And I said, nah. I don't want to do that. I've done enough of that. I don't want to do that again. So I've called this origin story. Origin stories are big these days. Companies have origin stories. So this is my origin story. So if you read the honors program newsletter, then you know that I am retiring after the semester. And thinking about my career and about what I want to say tonight, the lyrics from that Talking Heads song resonated with me. And you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? And that's a question I have asked myself many times over the years. How did I get here? How did I get where I am? So at Questrom, you learn the checklist approach to career management. You investigate alternatives, do due diligence, network, talk to mentors, and then make objectively reasonable choices. It's logical, like solving a Rubik's Cube. And some single-minded people actually manage their careers that way. Not many, but some. Other people's careers, I believe most other people's careers, proceed like an off-brand game of chutes and ladders with multiple dice, dead ends, and a chorus shouting, "You're doing it all wrong. Everything you're doing is wrong." So, how did I get here? It's 1975, January. I know.
Why is that funny?
1975, wow. Richard Nixon resigned 5 months ago. The last U.S. personnel will evacuate Vietnam in 3 months. Barry Manilow, Barry White, and Disco Tex all have songs in the Billboard Top 10. I'm a second semester junior in the Boston University College of Liberal Arts Department of Political Science. My professors include Howard Zinn and Francis Fox Piven. And I've returned to BU after dropping out for a year. Some of you have heard some parts of the story before. So I've returned to BU after dropping out for a year, and I am 22 years old. And yes, that is the apartment on Columbia Street in Cambridge that some of you have heard some stories about. One of my courses is called Political Practicum, which is an internship for credit. And I'm working at Prisoners' Rights Project at 2 Park Square, which is now 2 Park Plaza, which is a narrow building with a round elevator. And I was so pleased to see when I went there recently that it still has a round elevator. And that at the time housed nonprofit organizations and lefty law firms, left-wing law firms. It's adjacent to Hillbilly Ranch, which, you remember? Probably not, you're way too young. It's adjacent to the Hillbilly Ranch, which is a country and western bar, and across the street is the Playboy Club. Boston, back in the day, had a Playboy Club in Park Square. Park Square is unlovely, it's gritty. So Prisoners' Rights Project, which I'll also refer to as PRP, or the project, is a federally funded response to high-profile prison protests and uprisings. In September 1971, inmates took control of the state prison in Attica, New York, holding hostage 42 guards and staff. After 5 days, Governor Nelson Rockefeller ordered state and local police to retake the prison. Over 40 people died, including 10 hostages. In Massachusetts, following months of tension between guards and prisoners over the latter's attempt to seek union certification, in March 1973, the prison commissioner allowed citizen representatives to enter MCI Walpole, Mass Correctional Institution Walpole, to observe conditions. Prison guards responded with a walkout and a strike. Prisoners took over and ran the prison for more than 2 months without reported violence. Embarrassed by the prisoners' success, on May 18th, the Department of Corrections ordered armed guards to use force to end the nonviolent takeover of the prison. They did, violently. Prisoners' rights movement followed naturally from protest movements of the 1960s and 1970s. It was front-page news and urgent. My first week at Prisoners' Rights Project, I'm instructed to visit MCI Walpole, interview prospective clients, and discuss with project staff how to respond. I have never interviewed a client. I have no experience with either law or prisons. Entering MCI Walpole is surreal. I introduce myself and explain my visit to the guard behind the thick glass in the control room of the prison's lobby. He passes me a form to complete and instructs me to store personal belongings in a locker and wait with other visitors near a sliding steel door. The door opens. We proceed into a narrow rectangular space with a closed steel door at the far end. High concrete walls surround us and open into a guard tower. Armed guards look down at us from their area. The door behind us shuts with a jarring clang. There is no way forward, no way back, no way up, no way out. Aptly, this room is called the trap. The far door opens with another clang, and we're led through this no man's land inside the prison's exterior walls, through an outdoor visiting area empty in the cold, into the main prison building. The other visitors go to the main visiting room. I'm led to a table in the prison's central corridor. My escort leaves, I sit. I'm the only visitor here, but I'm not alone. Guards stand in groups near cell block doors. Prisoners walk by. They wear jeans, untied sneakers, white t-shirts. Nothing in their clothes or gait says convicted criminal. Some look at me, a stranger, longer than is comfortable. I nod. I do not stare back. The prison is loud. Every surface reflects sound. Linoleum, concrete, bulletproof glass, cinder block, steel. Conversation, shouts, laughter, hoots, and yells echo. It's cacophony. A prisoner approaches where I sit. He says, Paul Harding, a name on my list. I stand. David Randall from the Prisoners' Rights Project. We shake hands. He's a few years older than me, lean and muscled in a white t-shirt. He states, you're not a lawyer. No. A law student? No. I do not tell him I'm a college junior who started volunteering at PRP for course credit 2 days ago. He says, well, you're here, and sits across the table from me. I say, what can I help you with? He looks at me directly. You've never been in a prison before. No. Sit here with your back to the wall. You need to see who's coming. Self-conscious over my naivete, I move to the chair next to him. Don't be embarrassed. Walpole isn't a college dining hall. We talk for 40 minutes. He's 27, from Brockton. He was convicted of multiple armed robberies in 1969 and is serving a 12 to 25-year sentence. He talks casually of his criminal record, which began in his early teens. He's been in prison for most of the 13 years since 1962. In 1962, I was 9, in 4th grade. I asked again why he contacted PRP for help. Screws are trying to jam me up. Someday they'll lug me. You'll get word and know what it's for. He stands, shakes hands, says, you've got other people to see, and walks away. I interview clients for another 2 hours. It's dark when I leave. Paul Harding spreads the word. I am good people. My caseload grows. In the coming weeks, I interview prisoners convicted of armored car holdups and bank robbery from Charlestown, naturally. That part of this movie is true, anyway. Assault and battery, armed robbery, possession of a sawed-off shotgun, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter, rape, and other crimes. Some seek help with specific problems. Others want only to talk. They are bored, I'm a new face, and meeting with me gets them out of their cells. Soon I'm working 40 hours a week or more, for free, while attending all of my classes and keeping up with my coursework. One day, Tim and Rich, respectively a project lawyer and paralegal, asked me if I want to handle a disciplinary hearing, a D hearing, for a prisoner named Bobby Daigle. He's held in 10 block, MCI Walpole's Departmental Segregation Unit, the DSU. 10 block is a prison within a prison. Prisoners call it the hole. 10 block prisoners are confined for 23 hours a day. They are released to exercise outside in dog runs, adjacent chain link cages perhaps 20 feet long and 4 feet wide. Now and then, they are allowed to shower. They converse with each other by talking or shouting between cells. So, very uplifting so far, right? Everybody's like, Daigle has been in 10 block for most of the past 4 years. He was sent there for, among other things, taking 2 guards hostage. He released them without harm. He is charged with violating the prison's disciplinary code by creating a disturbance, specifically starting a fire and verbally assaulting a guard. I respond, of course I'll represent him, as if I do this all of the time. They tell me it's a kangaroo court. Your job is to stand up for Daigle. Let the prison know we're watching and gathering evidence for a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of D hearings. They also tell me that one of the project lawyers has handled 150 D hearings for prisoners at Walpole and lost every single one. So, prisoners with money, members of organized crime, wealthy drug dealers, convicts with middle-class backgrounds, hire criminal defense lawyers to represent them at D hearings. Daigle gets me. A few days later, I interview Bobby Daigle in the 10-block visiting room. Unlike the prison's other visiting rooms, which are open and contain multiple chairs, benches, and tables, this small room is bisected by a table and a wire mesh screen to prevent contact between prisoner and visitor. Daigle enters and sits on the other side of the screen. I introduce myself. He is in his early 30s with brown hair and a pasty complexion. What happened, Bobby? He is tense and emotional. His story spills out urgently, as if he needs to convey it before the next bad thing happens to him. It's hard to follow, includes events not temporally related to the disciplinary charges, but eventually I untangle it. Rich, Daigle's 10-block neighbor, had severe stomach pain and was yelling for guards to take him to the infirmary. They ignored him. Other prisoners joined the yelling. The guards ignored them too. Time passed. Occasionally, to force guards to respond, prisoners cut their wrists. These are not suicide attempts. The trick, which they learn, is slicing the veins enough to bleed convincingly, but not so much as to bleed out. Seeing blood, not knowing the wound's severity, and not wanting responsibility for a dead prisoner, guards will take the bleeding inmate to the infirmary. It's a desperate, dramatic act, but when done properly, not life-threatening. Rich cut too deep. Blood spurted from his wrist. Panicking, he screamed for help. Other prisoners followed. Minutes passed. Guards ignored them. Frustrated by the guards' failure to respond, Daigle created a more urgent problem. He set fire to items in his cell, threw the burning heap into the corridor, and added more flammable material to the blaze. Noise erupted. Bellowing, screaming, cursing, banging. The din and smoke finally worked. Guards entered the tier, extinguished the flames, and took Rich to the infirmary. Then they charged Daigle with creating a disturbance. He asks, how do we handle this? Lawyers have a saying, when the facts are against you, argue the law. When the law is against you, argue the facts. When the facts and law are against you, just argue. Setting the fire and threatening the guards both violate the prison's disciplinary rules. How do we handle this? Necessity. You had no choice. Guards ignored the noise. You feared Rich would bleed out. You knew they'd respond to a fire, so you said it. Daigle shrugs. It's something. I arrived early for the afternoon hearing, wearing a corduroy jacket and a tie. I'm surprised when the guard directs me to the prisoner's side of the 10-block visiting room, opposite where I sat before. The guard returns with Daigle and locks us in together. So, I'm locked in a small visiting room with a prisoner who was sent to 10-block for taking hostages. I'm tense. Bobby's tense. We make tense small talk. The opposite door opens. 3 uniformed guards enter, sit, and look at us through the screen. One introduces himself as the disciplinary board chairman. He reads the charges. He asks, you are? This is Bobby Daigle, and I'm David Randall from the Prisoners' Rights Project. Are you a lawyer? No. A law student? No. The guards smile and exchange looks. The chairman asks, what's your response to these charges? Before I can speak, Daigle launches his emotional, complicated, jumbled story. The board does not interrupt. Neither do I. They watch, listen, and nod, as if waiting for him to exhaust himself. My opening does not come. The longer Bobby talks, the longer I am silent, the more useless I feel. I am mute. like a hood ornament. Our necessity argument is lost in the weeds. This moment is slipping away. Eventually, Bobby stops. There's silence. The chairman breaks it when he says to me, smirking, "You're doing a hell of a job, counselor." I am embarrassed. My face reddens and my ears burn. I failed. Then I am self-conscious. Everyone knows I'm an imposter. I am a college junior playing lawyer in front of 3 prison guards on behalf of a convicted criminal incarcerated in the hole in Massachusetts maximum security prison. What made me think I could do this? Then I get angry. The guards own the leverage. They toyed cruelly with Rich when he sought medical help. Whatever crimes these prisoners committed, guards should not jerk them around just for sport. Prison is a rigged game, just like this kangaroo court hearing. I am not a lawyer, but I'm here, literally locked with Bobby on the prisoner's side of the room. When both facts and law are against you, just argue. Mr. Daigle had no choice but to set the fire to save Rich's life after the guards' inexcusably slow response. The board looks at me with mild surprise. When the guards ignored Rich's pleas, he used one of the few tools available to get results. He sliced his wrists. Was this a game? Did the guards ignore Rich's pleas to see if he would slice his wrists? Unfortunately, Rich cut too deep. He needed immediate help. The whole tier was shouting. The guards still failed to respond. Why? They must have heard the commotion. They chose to ignore it. Angered by the guards' intention, fearful of the severity of Rich's wounds, frustrated by his own long experience in 10 block, Mr. Daigle used another tool. He started a fire. That worked. The guards did what they should have done earlier. They took Rich to the infirmary. Mr. Daigle admits he caused a disturbance, set a fire, and threatened guards. He responded emotionally, but effectively, to prevent a more serious problem. Put yourself in Mr. Daigle's shoes. Imagine that your neighbor, your friend, your brother needs urgent medical help. Those whose job it is to respond ignore him. What would you do? How far is too far to go to get the help they need? Their smiles are gone. I'm leaning close as if I need to push my words through the screen. Their chair says, "Give us a few minutes." They leave. Daigle looks at me, raises his eyebrows, and shrugs. I shrug back. I'm pleased I found the words. I'm embarrassed it took an insult to find them. Soon the board re-enters. The chair speaks. We listened to what you said. We agree that Mr. Daigle's actions were justified. We find him not guilty of these offenses. He nods. They leave. I've not seen Daigle smile before. Holy shit. I can't believe it. Thank you. He shakes my hand and claps me on the back. He looks relieved and puzzled. We did not expect this. A guard unlocks the door. I return to Boston. Bobby returns to his cell. When I enter PRP late that afternoon, I am asked, "How was the hearing?" "We won." "What? You're kidding." "No, not kidding. They found him not guilty." Incredulity. "How? What happened?" I tell them. So my perception of these events has evolved since, whoops, a little too soon, has evolved since 1975. Then I thought we won on the merits of the necessity argument. Prisoners reinforced this self-flattering view. Word of Daigle's not guilty findings traveled the prison grapevine. Letters arrived at PRP addressed to David Randall, Esquire, and Mr. Attorney David. Prisoners asked me to handle criminal appeals, file writs of habeas corpus in federal court, sue government agencies pumping radio transmissions into their brains. Each visit to the prison generated more requests for help. It was a geometric progression of need. I was too caught up in the work to be self-critically reflective. Today, I view my role less heroically. D hearings for the guards were a game. Finding Daigle not guilty was a smart tactical decision. He violated the rules, but harmed no one, caused no physical damage, and obtained medical help for another prisoner. Guilty or no, he wasn't leaving 10 Block. The D board could give this round to Daigle at little cost to the system. We won because we held a few cards and played them well, not because my argument made them see our truth. But a win is a win. So, how does this relate to the themes I started my talk with? So, I provided a peek at how I began my journey from lawyer wannabe to lawyer don't wannabe to teacher. Kelly Kirby. It's a conveniently tidy origin story. It's also true to the extent memory and artistic license permit. But it begins when I'm already working at the project. What happened before then? What checklist carried me there? How did I get to Prisoners' Rights Project? Other political practicum students interned in the Massachusetts State House or for political campaigns or for established nonprofits like the Red Cross. Such internships were too mainstream for 22-year-old me. I rejected working for the man. Then one day, outside Howard Zinn's office, I overheard a student mention that she worked at Walpole State Prison. I lingered, listened, asked a few questions, contacted the project, and landed the internship. A few days later, I interviewed Paul Harding at MCI Walpole. You know the rest. But had I arrived 10 minutes later to Howard's office and missed that conversation, but for that random, unplanned, unsought event, I would not be talking to you here this evening. Think that's hyperbole? It's not. I met my wife at Prisoners' Rights Project.
I think you should clarify that.
She was not in prison, although she likes to tell it that way. Judy worked with Jeffrey Beatty at Greater Boston Legal Services. You know the name Jeffrey Beatty because his name is on the textbook that you use for LA 245. Jeffrey Beatty became a law professor at the School of Management. In 1997, I got a job working as adjunct law faculty at Babson College. When I got that job, I talked to Jeffrey, seeking his advice about teaching undergraduates, teaching law to undergraduates. A few years later, he contacted me when SMG was looking for new law faculty. I started to work at SMG, and here I am. So, back to the topic of checklists, career paths, logical unfolding of one's career. Some people have Rubik's Cube careers, not me. Mine is a chutes and ladder career. So, that's it. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Oh, yeah.
Can I ask for questions? Do you have any questions? No questions. You know, talk about prison is a nice, uplifting topic. Kelly.
What area of law did you practice once you were actually a licensed attorney?
When I went to law school, I went to become a social action lawyer to do work. I was done with prison work at that point, but I wanted to use my law degree to make the world a better place. Did a good job, right? It's in such good shape now. And so that's what I intended to do when I went to law school. That's why I went to Northeastern Law School, which is primarily a public interest law school. And when I graduated, I got a job at a corporate law firm. Because in between my first year and my third years of law school, Judy and I bought a house. Well, first we broke up. Then we got back together. And then we bought a house. And then we got married. And then she was pregnant with our first child. So life happened in between the first and third years of law school. So I worked at Mintz-Levin, which is a corporate firm in Boston. I was a transaction lawyer. Yeah, Mark?
So when are you writing the book?
Chapter 1, or that's probably like chapter 11. I got to do the first 10, and then everything comes thereafter. So, anything else? Paige.
How did you feel like representing people in prison? Like, did you feel like there was a conflict internally with that kind of a thing, or?
It's a good. I didn't at the time because I got caught up in the work. And when I first started to work, the first people I met, like Paul Harding, who I developed a very, got to know him pretty well. They were, I didn't know what to expect, but most of the people I met in prison were like people you meet outside prison. And they didn't look any different for the most part. There were some that did. And, talking with them, Paul was a smart, charming, articulate guy. And so the environment in which I was meeting them was, I wasn't meeting them in an environment where they would necessarily be threatening to me. But I did meet people that I never wanted to run into on the street. I met a lot of bad people. But in part it was because I was 22 and idealistic, and you can attach whatever the labels you want to that. But I believed, and I still believe, that just because somebody is in prison does not mean that they should be treated like an animal. Because the reality is, and it has nothing to do with altruism really, the reality is that most of the people who get sent to prison, 70%, are going to be released. They're going to get out. And if you send people to prison and then you turn them into worse human beings when they're in prison, and then you release them into the public again, what are the chances of them having, turning around their lives? They're not very good. So, and I still think that that is a major flaw with our prison system, is that there's no, they don't even talk about rehabilitation in prisons anymore. Back then, when I was doing this work, rehabilitation was something that people talked about. It was one of the theoretical objectives of sending people to prison. That's not even on the table anymore. But yeah, there were people, just a quick story, once in that 10-block visiting room, it was the only time I ever had an interview with a prisoner. I was glad that there was a barrier between us. I was interviewing this guy, talking to this guy who was in 10 block. And I can't remember what he was so upset about, but he was really upset. And he was really upset with me. And he was screaming at me, and veins were popping out of his neck, and he was just laying into me. I can't remember what I had done wrong in his view, but whatever it was, he was not a happy guy. And so, and then about 9 months later, I was living in Central Square, and I was walking to the T on Mass Ave in Central Square, walking down, right near the T stop, and this guy comes walking down the street. He's gotten out of Walpole, and he's walking towards me on the street, and I think, oh, geez. And he sees me, and he says, "Hey, how you doing? Great to see you." Because he was out. And, you know, I'm sure he had forgotten that he had blasted me for something. I had. But he had. So, but it was, you know, I did it for, this is what I did when I graduated from college. I was a paralegal, Prisoner's Rights Project, for 2 years. And so I was ready to move on to other things in my life after doing that for a while. Yeah.
How do you think that we reshape the conversation about careers to include more shoots and ladders stories and less checklist stories?
I think it's really hard. I mean, if you talk to, I know if you talk to Liz or Dean Reiser or Professor Spooner or, you know, most of the faculty here, they will applaud trying to look at it a different way. And we go back to the project that you and Shannon did when you were here, The Road Less Traveled. And that's something you were talking about as a sophomore. And, you know, trying to focus more attention on people who follow different paths. But I think I think, you know, we have to keep trying to do that, but it's hard to do because, you know, and part of it's the nature of education in general these days. Part of it is the nature of business education. And, you know, people feel like if I'm going to spend $250,000 to get a degree, I should be employed when I'm done. But I still think, and I get that, and I'm a parent, and I've had to, you know, I've had 3 kids go through college, and so I get that dynamic. But we still have very narrow views, I think, of what skills one needs to have in order to have a career. I have a good friend who was the vice chairman of EMC before it was bought by Dell, taken 5 or few years ago. And Bill always said that he looked for people who could write well. That was his primary criteria when hiring someone at EMC. He wanted people who could write, who could communicate, and who were intellectually open and curious. He said, I can teach them everything they need to know about the computer storage business and about the work that we do. But I want them to be able to communicate effectively and to be curious and want to learn. But it's a great question, and you know it's a very complicated thing to address. Theo, long time, no see.
Do you mind if I ask you like 1.5 questions? And before,
You know,
Wouldn't be
go
Theo if he
crazy.
didn't.
Go crazy. Buy 2 questions, Theo.
well, first of all, thank you so much for talking to us, because I think I speak for everyone when I say that people listen to you and the way that you speak and your stories, and they're incredibly inspiring.
Thank you.
So first of all, thank you. First quick question: Are you still at all in touch with the Prisoners' Rights Project? Thinking
No.
about getting in touch?
No.
Okay.
No, no. This is the short answer.
That's the half question.
Yeah. No, everybody I knew who, you know, that was where that's where Judy and I met, was doing work. My social circle, you know, the friends I had for a long time before I went to law school for many years, were people I met working there. You know, it's intense work, and anytime you do intense work with people, you form often these really strong bonds. But that's another earlier phase of my life that I'm not in touch with anymore.
Sure. And so you touched in the beginning, you mentioned that you had sort of started being a lawyer. I'm assuming that's when you were in the real estate or transaction business.
Yeah.
And then you decided that you didn't want to be a lawyer. And I was wondering if you don't mind touching a little bit on that. And did your decision have anything to do maybe with this experience, reflecting on it? Like what was the story? What was your thinking there?
That is not half the question.
How many hours a week do you
That's a
spend?
good question.
There's a lot of different threads in that question.
Sorry.
But well, I knew what I was getting into. So I called on you, Theo. when I left Mintz-Levin, I loved working at Mintz-Levin. I really did. I loved the work some days, but it was interesting. I loved the people there. I really enjoyed the people I worked with. But when I left there in 1988, I guess, 1987, 1988. I had 3 kids, and it was always more important to me to have have a relationship with my kids and to be a father and to be a spouse than it was to be a lawyer in a big corporate law firm. For me, I never expected to wind up in a place like Mintz-Levin. It wasn't a lifelong aspiration. I sort of stumbled into it, like I've stumbled into a lot of things in my life, apparently. I stumbled into it. I liked it. It was great for a while. It opened a lot of doors for me down the road, but it came to a point where it was clear that I needed to, Kelly asked how many hours I was working, and I billed the number of hours I needed to bill, but I didn't bill as many hours as one could bill, because I would go home, and that wasn't, if I wanted to stay and become partner, I needed to make the firm the most important thing in my life. And for me, it was a really easy choice. I wasn't willing to do that. Once it became clear that that was my choice, it's like, fine, it's been swell, but no, this is never going to be the most important thing in my life, and I don't want it to be. So that's when I left, and I went to work for a real estate developer's general counsel, and so it was, which it's been I've done a lot of different things, as some of you know anyway. In my career, I've had a lot of different types of jobs, but one thing has always sort of led logically to the next. But yeah, it's been more like chutes and ladders for sure. Vanessa?
What's one piece of advice you would give your college self?
Oh God, just one?
Maybe 2.
Well, that's sort of what, if I write a book, that's what it will be about. God, there's so many. I have always been someone, I think this is true of many people, but I have always been someone who's learned much more from my mistakes and my failures than I have from my successes. The chairman of the D hearing, I still remember that. I still remember what it felt like when he said to me, "You're doing a hell of a job, counselor." Snarky, sarcastic, with a smirk on his face, and I felt like an idiot. And it still burns me. And I carry things around like that. And so I don't know if that's good advice to the young me to not carry things around like that, because it's always motivated me to do better, to push myself more. I don't know. You know what? The best advice, the advice that I would give to the 22-year-old me: do yoga and meditate. I wish I had started doing yoga 40 years ago. I think a lot of things would have been much easier had I done so. So yeah, that would be the advice I'd give the younger me, is to start practicing yoga.
Do you have any regrets about your career path?
No. I don't regret leaving Mintz-Levin. No, I have no regrets about my career path. It's been fun. It's been enjoyable, and then I stumbled into teaching. I wondered if anybody asked how I started teaching, and that's sort of a piece with this. I started teaching at Babson because one morning, like at 6:45, I was walking my dog in my neighborhood, and it was in November. It was sort of a cold, foggy day, and I ran into a neighbor, a guy named Mike Fetters, who Dean Reiser knows. She used to work with Mike when she was at Babson. And Mike was in the accounting faculty at Babson. And and he was walking his dog, and so we chatted, and I'd known Mike for a number of years. Our kids had played sports together, we had coached soccer together, and he said, "Have you ever considered teaching?" And I said, you know, like, yeah, like a lot of lawyers, I think a lot about doing something else than practicing law. And he said, well, if you're ever interested in teaching, just send me a resume, and then maybe we'll give you a call someday. So I sent him a resume. This was in November of 1996. I sent him a resume, and I didn't think anything about it. And then the following May, beginning of May, I got a phone call from Babson asking if I wanted to teach a sort of the equivalent of LA 245, but in their graduate program, their MBA program. And not really being in tune then with the academic calendar, when they said you want to teach, I was thinking, yeah, that would be September. That's when the next semester is. So I thought, I'll have all summer to prepare. This will be great. So I said, sure, of course I want to teach. You know, can you send me a syllabus? So they said, great. Well, you start in 3 weeks. Because it was for the first summer session. Maybe I knew that when I was in college that there were summer sessions. I certainly never took a class in a summer session. And so it never occurred to me when they were asking me that it was for a job. It was starting in 3 weeks. But I knew if I said no, the opportunity probably wouldn't come by again. So I said, yeah, sure. And I came home from teaching that night. It was one of the most incredible experiences I ever had in my professional career. And I came home and at 9:30 and told Judy, this is what I want to do. I want to find a job teaching. This is what I want to do. Because and I thought of trying to work this into the talk, but couldn't really find a good way to do it. Keep it under control in terms of its length. But when I started to teach, it was the first time I had felt the same engagement, sort of being one with the experience of work, since I had been working at Prisoners' Rights Project. When I was working there, it was all-consuming. It took over my life. It's what I spent all my time thinking about and doing, and then socializing with the people who I was doing it with. If you ever have that experience at work, and I'm sure you've had that experience doing some things, but where you are, sometimes we get it playing sports or some other activity where you are in the moment. You're totally in the moment. And I felt that often when I was working in Prisoners' Rights, and I felt that again when I was in front of a classroom. And it was exhilarating. And so it was sort of like a drug, and I wanted to get that high again and again. And I was fortunate it worked out. I would have been happy to teach at Babson, but they didn't have any full-time positions. So I worked there as an adjunct for a year and a half, and then Jeffrey Beatty called me one day, and here I am. Dean Reiser, you had a question.
I did have a question. As one of the few people in the room who has some distance between my 22-year-old self and myself of today, when you said, as you sort of came full circle and you talked about the idealistic 22-year-old you were, as you look back from your vantage point now, how does your idealism now compare?
That's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. I mean, at this point, you're all looking forward in your career or are a little bit farther down the road in your career, some people. But I've spent a lot of time, my career is now in the rearview mirror. I think about it retrospectively. And I've thought about that question a lot, about the sense of possibility. Because that's really what idealism is, I think. The sense of possibility I had when I was 22 about everything, about the world, about myself, about relationships, about what my life would be like. That gets, life takes its toll And one can lose a lot of that over the years. Those of you who know me well know that I tend to be a glass half empty kind of human being, which is sort of the opposite of being idealistic. And they're laughing because they're saying, that's putting it mildly. But I still think about that. I think about, I guess the idealism has shifted, and it's less global, but it's more about sort of how I live my life, what my relationships are like with other people, how I use whatever talents I have, but it's trying to hold on to that in some way is still a goal, even if I haven't quite figured out how to do it, but I do think about that a lot. So, anything else? Yeah, Fote.
Earlier in your career, you had like this passion for social justice. Do you feel like as a teacher, did you have that same feeling that it was like social justice in a way?
It is ironic. When I went to BU as an undergrad, obviously. When I was an undergrad at BU, I swore I would never have anything to do with Boston University for the rest of my life. So it's ironic that I wound up teaching here. And there are other ironies too that we don't have that I won't go into now. And these are really long stories. But and so on one level, we've got some friends who we knew from that era. We have sort of a lot of left-leaning friends. And on one level, teaching in a business school, teaching people, how to make money is how people who aren't in business school think about it. Seems like, boy, you've come a long way. Whatever happened to you? I always liked, none of you were here, well, some of the faculty was, but none of you were here when Lou Lateef was the dean. Peter was here, Kelly was here, Dan, some other folks. And my contemporaries. And I always, that's when the school was called the School of Management. And I will confess, I liked that name a lot more than I liked the School of Business. Because Lou, for all of his faults, and he had many, when he would, at the admitted students open house, Lou would give his talk. And he would say something, I'll just be paraphrasing, but he said, every human endeavor needs professional management. Whatever you are doing, whether you are running a business, running a nonprofit, whether you're in the military, every activity that human beings do needs people to know how to manage, how to assemble resources, deploy resources, motivate people, define plans, develop strategies, accomplish goals. And the first time I heard him say that, I was really moved by that. That really resonated with me. And I felt like I think it's true. And I think it's a good way to think about the skills that people can acquire in a place like, Questrom. And I guess my idealism changed in the way that, for me, I love being in front of the classroom for the most part of my career, but also the relationships with students, getting to know students and feeling like I had an impact on their lives. And every student who I've developed a friendship with, they've had an impact on my life as well. And so I felt like maybe I was imparting something. Maybe there was something they were taking from me that about, I don't know, whatever wisdom I might have accumulated over the years. So I felt like my goals became a lot less lofty, a lot more immediate, to just try to have, good, honest relationships with people, and to try to share whatever I could about, all the mistakes I've made along the way and what one could learn from. Oh, Peter, yes, sorry.
I don't have a question. I just want to say, it's actually very interesting to hear all this because I feel like I'm living proof of what you're talking about. And the fact that I graduated here in 2005, I think the first honors program class. But when I graduated high school in 01, I did not think I'd go into business school. I came here, did not think I'd be going to law school, but you're actually, every time people ask me how I got to where I am, I say I have a professor, Professor Randall, who saw something in me and thought I should become a lawyer, and I went to law school. And then when I went to law school, I thought I'd do corporate. I became a DA, a prosecutor instead. Went a different route. So I just think your story is
Are you still prosecuting?
I'm actually, I don't do that anymore. I left, I did civil, whatever. We can talk later about
Yeah.
that. But I'm still a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, not want to be yet. But I don't know, I just think it's very interesting to hear that that's your background. And, you know, I think a lot of us come to college, especially in this, you know, such a great institution as BU, and think we have this plan about what we're going to do and how we're going to succeed, and we work so hard to get here. But the funny thing is, as long as you keep working hard, opportunities are going to come up, and you're just going to end up, you may end up at a place where you didn't think you were going to be. I mean, it's really sad to hear you're leaving because BU is going to have a tremendous loss when you leave. The School of Management, I'm not calling it Questrom.
Thank you, Peter. It's nice
I
of
mean,
you to say.
since I graduated in 2005, I've not come back for any events from Philadelphia.
I know.
But this is basically where, I mean, hearing that you were going to be the speaker, it's great. So.
Hearing you say that, and going back to what Natalie asked before, this will sound probably flip and, but I'll say it anyway. One of the ways I think, one thing that we need to do to try to get students to think about their careers in a different way is to tell them not to listen to their parents. I know that is, I can say that because I'm leaving, where they're going to fire me, so what? But our students, we all see this, all the faculty, everybody, all staff, advisors, we see the pressure that students come here with, which often comes from family. And I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to blame family here. I understand the you know, parents who are spending $250,000 to send their kids to school. They want something for it. And I think a lot of students, we have so many first-generation students who feel an incredible weight of responsibility to their parents, who sacrificed everything, who worked 3 jobs, 4 jobs, who scrimped and saved on everything to give their child this opportunity. And so their children come here and feel like, I've got to do something special with this. I really have to make this special. And that's a lot of pressure to carry around when you're 18 years old, 20 years old. And we see the pressure that you all put on each other when you're students. You guys are brutal to each other. The expectations you put, you're doing that for the summer, you don't have an insurance trip that's going to lead to a job, what's wrong with you? I remember, I'm really glad that Emily is here tonight, for those of you who don't know Emily. Emily was a fantastic student at this School of Management, went into, I'm drawing a blank, Teach for America, and is now principal of an elementary school. He's had an incredibly successful career as a teacher. And by any measure, she has been just an incredible success. And I remember hearing, you know, students talking about somebody else, one student was saying they were thinking of going into Teach for America, and one of their friends, classmates, saying, why would you waste your Questrom background becoming a teacher? I mean, that's wrong. You know, that's what this project that Natalie and Shannon worked on years ago, the Road Less Traveled project, was an attempt to try to remove some of that pressure from students and to make them aware of alternatives, to make people feel less lonely when they felt that they didn't fit into the Questrom mainstream. the reality, and anybody who talks to students can tell you this, the Questrom mainstream actually is confused students who don't really know what they want to do, but who feel like everybody else has a plan, everybody else has got it wired and is just going to go straight to the top, and they're the only one who's confused and uncertain. That's the norm. That's the norm. That's how most people are. We see that, but you don't show those faces really to each other, because you got to put on a good front. So just don't follow your parents' advice. Just talk to Dean Reiser, Liz, Professor Spooner. They'll give you the straight scoop. Yes, Nicole.
What advice do you have for those of us who are kind of in our first or second post-grad jobs, beginning that kind of shoots and runners aspect of our lives?
Do the best you can. Excel. Bye, Dan. Thanks for coming. Particularly with those jobs that you get out of college, a lot of the positions people wind up in, whatever they are, graduating, having something in your background, a job, a degree, something, employer, something that says, where somebody said, like puts a stamp on your forehead and says, we validate that this is a smart, talented human being. It opens doors down the road. Whether it should or not. I mean, the fact that I was an associate at Mintz-Levin in Boston, that I worked at this corporate law firm, still today, I left Mintz-Levin 40 years ago. 40 years ago? 30 years ago. A long time ago, I can't remember. Long before you were born. I left it years ago. But the fact that I was at Mintz still gives me a certain credibility with some people. Because they said, what did you used to do? They find out what I'm doing now. It's like, oh, well, okay. But what did you do in the background? Well, I was a lawyer at Mintz. Oh, really? And so, so it's important to, whatever it is you're doing when you start out, to do well. Throw yourself into it. Do the best you can. Learn as much as you can. Find mentors if you're lucky enough to find good mentors. Not easy to do. I've honestly never had a good mentor in my career. And so if you can find someone who's a good mentor, it's really invaluable. And don't burn bridges, because you never know when you are going to need somebody or want somebody who you used to work with to put in a word for you or to network with or something. So, yeah, work hard. Anything else?
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks so much, David. That was really, first of all, brought back good memories, because I used to represent prisoners all the time. So, as well, this is something we share, so, yeah.
And Gina did too.
And Gina did too, yeah. And, yeah, murderers, a lot of times murderers. It was good.
Murderers, people too.
They are people too. Okay, so I just want you guys to take advantage of the time to meet each other. I encourage students and alumni to take some time to meet each other. And alumni, for those of you who stuck in a little late, if you could just make sure that you have a chance to do our sign-in shoot and indicate like anything you might be interested in participating in the future. And hopefully we'll have more events. And for Facebook Live crowd, you can email Liz, Dean Reiser, or I with that information as well. So just reach out that way and we will connect you with our students who are pulling together these efforts. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.